And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God.
The revelation of Jesus Christ.
For this sermon, but somebody else had already used it. That's why I found it. A dragon in the delivery room.
Oh, yeah. That's what you've been telling us right along.
So I borrowed on it a little bit. A dragon visits the manger. So you can just see the manger scene, and it's got the shepherds, and it's got Mary and Joseph and the baby in the manger and a dragon. I don't think that'll catch on. But that's what we're reading about. It's Revelation chapter 4 and verse 4:12, or if you're not dyslexic, you could have 12:4. I think we'll go with 12:4. Revelation 12:4. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. Dragons are often a large snake, and you don't think of a snake as standing, but in the classical picturing of the dragons, they stood. And this dragon stands before the woman. The woman was about to give birth. The dragon's anxiety does not relate to the mother who is about to give birth, but to the son. He understands that the son is the one that's going to be a problem for him, not so much the mother. Isn't that interesting? He wanted to devour the child. Satan is a murderer. And he has been working on this project, stopping the line of redemption down through the ages. In Genesis chapter 6, Satan was attempting to corrupt the line so there could not be a redeemer. When the sons of God went into the daughters of men, there in Genesis chapter 6, the first few verses in the chapter. He moved Rebekah to cheat Esau. Rebekah, of course, is the one that had the idea, steal the birthright, and that would move Esau to kill Isaac. And so that would have been Isaac is the one in the line of redemption. And the dragon moved that attempted murder, that idea of murder that didn't eventually work out. And then there was Egypt. What did Egypt do? Tried to kill all the male children in Israel. And I'm sure that was Satan's inspiration also. Saul attempted to murder David in the line. And so it went. There were just an awful lot. Athaliah. Y'all remember Athaliah? Some of you do, some of you don't. I'll read you a verse, 2 Chronicles 22:10. Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she rose and destroyed all the royal offspring of the house of Judah. And God's promise was that the Messiah would sit on the throne of David in Judah, yes. And Athaliah tried to put an end to that. She wanted to be the queen and be in charge. And she didn't quite get them all killed. There was one very young one that was swept away and hidden and then installed to be the next king in the line. And then there was a fellow by the name of Haman. Haman's found in the book of Esther. And he wanted to have all of the Jews in all of the realm killed. Kill all the Jews, promise can't be fulfilled. Herod came down to Bethlehem and he killed all the male babies, 2 years old and younger. God preserved Christ. But Satan has been murdering all down through the ages to try to stop Christ and redemption. Then after it had been accomplished, Satan was still busy. He moved the Germans to try to exterminate all of the Jews. If successful, there'd be no one to inherit the promise. Wouldn't have been quite as good from Satan's standpoint as managing to kill the baby, but it would have gotten him something. This has been the dragon down through the ages. Verse 5, and she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Do you notice in your translations that the word child is in italics? And so if it was a son, what gender would it be? It's a male, right? So really what we have here is a son, a male. Now if that's not emphasizing what gender we're talking about, I don't know what is. A son is going to be a male, and then you say it's a male specifically. You know, sometimes gender is important to God, and sometimes not. Sometimes he is speaking of just all mankind, men and women alike, when he uses a phrase about men somehow. Sometimes it's really important. There are people who would like to make God our heavenly mother, and they just rebel against everything that God for a reason said he was our heavenly father, and he made a distinction in the household so that we would know what a father was and therefore understand him. And here in this passage, she gave birth to a son, a male. And he is to rule, a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Who do you suppose that is? You don't have any mystery there, do you? We don't have to worry about the interpretation of who we're talking about. The male child she gave birth to is Jesus Christ, obviously. The thing I find interesting here, a couple of things I find interesting. He's going to rule with a rod of iron. And that seems to be a big thing because it's 3 times in the book of Revelation. It's in this passage, it's in chapter 2 and verse 27, where it says, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces. And then it's in chapter 19 and verse 15. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. So it's emphasized, it's imprinted upon our minds that Jesus Christ is going to rule with a rod of iron. Now, rule is exactly the translation we have in the lexicon. Do you know what a lexicon is? Some of you will, some of you not. A lexicon defines, in this case, a Greek word in the English language. It's a dictionary of Greek for folks who speak English. And the lexicons all give this word translated as rule. Dr. Thomas says the better translation would be destroy. Now I'm quoting him here because none of the lexicons say the same thing, but he's got an argument for it. In chapter 2 and verse 27, this word is characterized as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces. He's going to rule as the vessels and potter are broken to pieces. What's that when the vessels of potter are broken to pieces? That's kind of destroying them, isn't it? And so Dr. Thomas says the word destroy would really fit there when you're talking about the vessels of potter being broken in pieces. And again in chapter 19 and verse 15, this word fits with strike down the nations and the fierce wrath of God. Is that more like rule or is that more like destroy? He's going to strike down the nations. And I'm thinking he got it right. Going to destroy the nations. So what he's going to do is destroy. So this is all leading up to chapter 16, and in chapter 16 we're going to have the bowl judgments, and you've got a pretty good idea already about what those bowl judgments are all about, right? They are destruction. They are destroying. So I think he shall destroy them with a rod of iron is a pretty good representation of what the text means here. As the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces. Her child is caught up. Caught up. It's translated snatched sometimes. A wolf snatches sheep. Same word as we have here for caught up. Some converts are snatched out of the fire. They have been particularly wicked. They're just about in the fire already, and then they get saved, and they're snatched out of the fire. So that's this word. But this same word is used of the rapture. Rapture has the idea of being caught up. Being caught up. Those who are alive and remain will be caught up together. Same word as we have here. The rapture of the church, however, will not satisfy this context. It is a proposed explanation of what has happened when the baby is snatched or caught up into heaven. They say, well, that's the rapture of the church. What's wrong with that idea? Well,
Christ hasn't lived on earth yet.
True, that's right. And it would not rescue the child. That's not a child rescue, the rapture of the church. This is talking about rescuing the child from the dragon. He's snatched up into heaven. And the church being raptured is not a rescue for the child. Some think that this is Christ being snatched away into Egypt. So, right after he was born, Herod was going to kill the babies, and they were warned in a dream, and they fled into Egypt, and so he was snatched out of Herod's grasp. What's wrong with that idea? Egypt is not heaven. He was snatched up into heaven.
Well, besides, they didn't go to Egypt immediately after he was born.
Yeah, a little bit later. But this wouldn't have to be immediately anyway. Really, we're going to come to the conclusion that this is the ascension of Christ. And that's not immediate either. It is troubling to some that to say he was caught up, that's where he was caught up into heaven, isn't it, in the ascension? After the crucifixion and resurrection, he ascended into heaven. He was caught up into heaven. We're talking about Christ. That's when he was caught up into heaven. Some people are troubled by the fact that that does not give any accounting of the crucifixion and resurrection. You say the crucifixion and resurrection are the most important events in the life of Christ. But the account we have here is not talking about the most important events in the life of Christ. What's it talking about? Talking about the battle between Satan and God. Child is born, child is caught up into heaven. Was that the primary purpose for Jesus being caught up into heaven? No, not the primary purpose, but it did serve that purpose. Sometimes things have a primary purpose and serve a secondary function. Jesus Christ healed for the glory of God. Jesus Christ healed to show his deity. Did he also heal out of compassion for people? Sure he did. It was a secondary purpose, but it was still a purpose. So it's the ascension. He was caught up. Gap of 33 years between the two ideas in this verse. He's born, he's snatched up. They're 33 years apart. But there's a bigger gap between verses 5 and 6. Between verses 5 and 6, there is a gap of the entire church age. 2 millenniums compared to 33 years. That's a bigger gap still, isn't it? Leaving out the church age certainly makes this all about Israel. And it is all about Israel. So you move from his being born and snatched up all the way to the end times, to the time of the book of Revelation. And God is just, he has skimmed through history from the fall of Satan and his animosity to God all the way through the birth of Christ and all the way down to the last ages in this sign, this great sign that was seen in heaven. And then it kind of slows down here at the end because it's into the realm of the 3.5 years that is the subject of the chapters that we're looking at. So verse 6 says, "Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. How long is 1,260 days? 3.5 years. Sometimes it's called 42 months. What's 42 months? 3.5 years. Sure. So the woman has a place, she's going to flee into the wilderness, and she's going to be nourished for 1,260 days. So Satan could not kill her child, and he goes after the woman after he cannot kill the child. And if he kills the woman, what's he gained?
Nobody for the kingdom.
Nobody for the kingdom. The woman is Israel. God has made promises to Israel. They're going to have this golden age. If he kills the woman, there's no golden age. It's proposed that this is a general picture of preservation under persecution. It's nothing specific. It's just, God preserves people through persecution. But that doesn't account for the vivid detail in our text. 1,260 days, the period of time she's preserved for. And we've been seeing this as we've gone along. It's 3.5 years, and it's going to be several times 3.5 years. The two witnesses, witness for how long? 3.5 years. So that won't work. It's been proposed that this is Israel's flight from Roman attack in 66 AD. No less a commentator than Henry Alford in his Greek New Testament has proposed that solution. When I was taking, I think it was second year Greek, they said Henry Alford was so trusted that if they were in doubt, they'd take his opinion on any matter of Greek. That was an old-time expert in the Greek language. But there was such an event. 66 AD, shortly after Christ had ascended into heaven, Jerusalem was surrounded by the armies of the Romans. And there were Christian folks there in Jerusalem who remembered what Jesus Christ had taught them. And they saw that and they said, it's time for us to get out of here because the armies are surrounding this city. Now let me remind you of what Jesus had taught them. Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24. This is Luke 21. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, that's what they saw. Then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the city, in the midst of the city, must leave, and those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant in those days, pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Well, this hadn't been that long since Jesus had made that warning. These people who had been listening to the words of Jesus saw the armies surrounding Jerusalem, and they did just exactly what Jesus told them to do. They got out of town. And they went to a place called Pella. And Pella is in the Decapolis region. Does anybody know what the Decapolis is? Decapolis, 10 cities. And the 10 cities are to the east of the Sea of Galilee. So they're in the northern end of the country, well away from Jerusalem. They fled to Pella, and they were quite successful in being preserved by their flight into Pella. And some folks have said this reference to the woman being protected in the wilderness is those who fled out of Jerusalem to Pella in the days of the Roman attack, just before the destruction by Titus in 70 AD. And that's that could be a pretty good explanation. But it's not quite it yet. This event wouldn't have any meaning for John's readers. Where are John's readers? He's writing to folks in Asia Minor. He's writing from the Isle of Patmos. He's writing to folks in that whole general area there, and this was rather an obscure event as compared to those reading John, and was already an historical event. Probably the better proposal is to say these are those who escape at the midpoint of the tribulation. These are Jews, this is Israel, fleeing out of Jerusalem at the midpoint, halfway through the tribulation period. Christ told Israel to flee when the abomination of desolation, prophesied by Daniel, appeared in the temple. Those responded, those who fled to Pella responded to what is recorded in the book of Luke that Jesus said. Sometimes you look at Luke and Matthew and think they're the same thing, but they're not. Now listen to what Matthew records Jesus is saying. Matthew 24, 15 through 21. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Do you see the difference in the trigger? When you get out of town. In Luke, it's when you see armies surrounding the city. Here in Matthew, you get out of town when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight might not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation. Then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will be. So there's some parallels, aren't there? If you're going to flee, doesn't make much difference if you're fleeing from the Roman army in 66 AD or if you're fleeing from the Antichrist in the middle of the tribulation. If you're going to flee, it's a good thing if you're not pregnant. It's a good thing if you're not nursing. It's going to be a good thing if it's not winter time. Be a better time for fleeing if it's not winter. It does snow there. I went there in the spring and I saw snow in the land of Israel. It does snow there, so winter can be cold. So pray that your flight is not in winter or on a Sabbath, for then will be a great tribulation. So that's a very different event. Daniel said the abomination would appear at the middle of the 70th week. Listen to it, Daniel 9:27. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. 1 week is how long? 7 years, exactly. But in the middle of the week, half of 7 is 3.5. He will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Middle of the tribulation, 3.5 years to go. He's going to make desolate there until such a time as the desolation is poured out. That's going to be the end of the tribulation. That's our same 3.5 year period. And when this departure, when this time to flee comes, they've got 3.5 years left. It's in the middle of the 7 year period. It's in the middle of the tribulation period. And what we're looking at, we've seen the events in Revelation right up to the middle of the tribulation period. We've seen the account of 2 witnesses. They're going to be testifying during the second half. The Antichrist is going to receive power during the second half. The beast and the false prophet that we haven't got to yet in chapter 13 are going to prevail during the second half. All these things are related to the great tribulation, the second half of the tribulation. And the woman is protected for 1,260 days, and that fits Daniel's prophecy. And that tells us what time that this woman is fleeing out. She's fleeing out in the middle of the tribulation and protected for the last 3.5 years. Where's she going to go? Well, she's going to go out into the wilderness. Now, one place it says mountains, the other place it says wilderness. The mountains can be a wilderness. Some have favored Petra. You've heard of Petra, the Red Rock City? Oh, that's a favorite place. When folks visit the Holy Land, they want to go to Petra. I went to Petra. I don't think it has anything to do with Petra, frankly. But it's a nice place to visit. I am told, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm told there are people that have stored Bibles in Petra. There are a lot of places you can store Bibles in Petra. It's a dry place. You've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those scrolls were preserved because they were kept in caves in approximately the same kind of climate as Petra has. So if you put a lot of Bibles down there in Petra, they might still be there when Israel gets there, when they flee out of Jerusalem. Except when they came up with this idea of Israel fleeing to Petra, place in the wilderness, it doesn't say what the place is, right? At that time, war wasn't quite as sophisticated as it is now. At that time, they thought more in terms of horses. And Petra is very defensible. It's got this you can drive a Jeep down if you're careful with the sides of the Jeep. You can get a Jeep through there. But it's a pretty easy place to pick off anybody that's coming through because you don't have to concentrate a wide range of fire. It's just right there. What's wrong with that idea? Airplanes, rockets, guided missiles, all kinds of things. How are they going to be protected in the wilderness? God's going to protect them. God able to do that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He can put a shield around them. Nobody can penetrate. You don't have to worry about anybody giving you up. God's got you covered. Wilderness has been a place for protection, safety of God's people. God led Israel out in the wilderness when they left Egypt. Might not be a very good place to live in unless you've got God leading you and getting water out of the rock and a few things like that, manna from heaven. But if God's leading you, the wilderness can be a wonderful place of protection. Elijah, he went and said, there won't be rain anymore except by my word. And he fled out into the wilderness, and God fed him with ravens. The ravens came. I've learned so much since I came to Fort Bragg. I never saw ravens. And it's almost like there's no other bird around here. But I understand. Ravens like to pick up food and drop it. Watch out for your trash can because they'll open it up if you give them just a little bit of a chance. And so I can understand them feeding Elijah. Get fed in the wilderness. She would be nourished there. Literally, there they would or may nourish her. Now we've got it in our translations as a passive. She will be nourished. But in the literal Greek statement, they will nourish her. But we don't know who they are. Now in our English rules, we're not supposed to use a preposition until we have already used a noun to which the preposition refers. Are you with me there? Pronoun, not preposition, pronoun. Thank you, Aldea. So if I say they, I ought to be able to look back before it and see who they are. They were named before, and now we're just saying they. Here, God does it His way. He doesn't have to have a noun before a pronoun. It's just the way He does it. They will nourish her for 3.5 years. We'll talk about who they are next time. It's a little bit after 7 already. To be continued. You got that. Questions? All right. Let's have a word of prayer, and then you have a good week. Our Father and our God, how we do thank you and praise your name for your goodness to us. Thank you, Father, that you've been carrying on this battle all through the ages. And thank you that you're telling us now how it's going to turn out, how it's going to finish up. We pray, Lord, that you'll help us to shape our lives by the knowledge that you are great, that you are able to take care of us. You can choose to allow us to be beheaded or whatever and take us into glory safely, and that's a good thing. Or you can choose for us to live out our days in long life and take us to glory, another good thing. Father, help us this week to just trust in you, to not fear man, but to fear you, and to live in the light of these events that are coming. We pray it.